So what we're going to look at today is the various ways you can log hours, and also touch a little bit on how and why, and in what situation you might use these different mechanisms to log hours. Hopefully you've all had the email with the link to the workbook in. You can always find the workbook from the help menu in your own system for this particular masterclass. And that has more information. It's a bit more detailed, has extra stuff in it. So if you've got the time, then please use that. But that's more of a sort of reference piece of material. I don't expect you to just sit down and read it start to finish, but it does have more extra information in there. So these are some of the things we're going to learn about today. So we're going to touch briefly on what the difference is between the volunteer log and the provider or admin logged hours. A little bit about the reports, which hours they're showing you, when, deleted hours, how to bulk log hours, and how to log individual hours. Those are the sorts of things we're going to go through at the minute. Quick review of where you can find help afterwards. You know, if you get stuck later on, or tomorrow, or next week, or whatever it is. A lot of this information we go through today is in your help and support menu in the tutorials and the videos there, and you can download the books, watch the video of the last class, and there's also extra videos about a whole bunch of different things, subjects on the application. So check out that help and support menu. There's also a peer advice area, which is like a sort of chat room for you to ask each other questions. So obviously we're very good at knowing what the software does, but you're the experts on how to apply that software in your particular arenas. So you can there's some people out there with some really great ideas, and you can ask each other and get involved there. Always check out the little tooltips, which are these little grey circles with a question mark in. They often give you some extra advice and detail about what you're looking at and what to put in there. We've got some searchable help, which is available from the question mark in the top right area. You can open a support ticket, which lots of you do already, which is probably the fastest and quickest way to get help. And there's also the instant chat, which is normally Alex monitors the instant chat, and she can help you with issues straight away in-app on the screen there. This is the link to the workbook, which will be in the comment in the chat section at the end, if you haven't managed to find it yet. But as I said, that is in the help menu as well under the masterclasses. Okay, so the first thing I want to touch on, there is a lot more of this in the workbook as well, is why we're even logging hours. You know, what's the point? So I guess you'll all have slightly different reasons for logging the hours and slightly different justifications, but the main sort of business case for logging these things is it helps to enhance engagement and retention with your volunteers. They really do like to see that hour total and like to like all humans, they like that. They have that sort of collective collecting instinct, and they like to collect the stuff they've done and how much they've done. And sometimes it's very useful for the volunteer if they have to provide hours for things like Duke of Edinburgh, you know, those sorts of schemes. It helps you as an organization secure better funding, more funding, and makes you eligible for more grants if you can show the impact you're having. The amount of hours you're logging, the amount of volunteers you're engaging, those sorts of things. It helps you to quantify your impact in quite a crude way, but it is still a way to quantify that impact. It can help accountability compliance in the sense that if you can encourage your volunteers and your providers to log hours, it makes them more aware of what's going on and which volunteers are turning up and those sorts of things. And finally, the volunteers definitely appreciate and definitely notice when their hours aren't logged. I'm sure you've had emails from volunteers asking why their hours haven't been validated by a provider in the past. You know, they really do notice those hour totals going up. Again, there's more of that in the workbook, which we don't have time to go over, but there's some more information about that. But I think it's worth having a think about why you want to log hours, and that enables you, when you're speaking to your providers and trying to encourage them to log hours, that helps you to encourage them as well to log those hours. So it's definitely worth having to think about why you're actually logging the hours in the first instance. So on to the practicalities. The first thing is we want to touch on is why TeamKinetic stores two totals for hours. We have the total hours that the volunteer has logged, and the total hours that the admin or provider has logged. The reason we do this is it helps to resolve any disputes that might arise. If you've got volunteers that have logged in more or less hours than they should, or providers that are logging more or less, having the two totals there at least gives you some way of working out what the correct picture is, and helps to resolve those disputes. They are vanishingly rare, though, those disputes, thankfully. They don't occur very often. It helps to fill in the gaps in the information if the provider or the volunteer isn't logging hours on one end or the other. It helps to fill in those gaps because you can look at what the volunteer has logged or what the provider has logged and make some decisions about what the actual true picture is. And it also means that the volunteer gets an hour total, even if they're not digitally engaged or they're not on the platform, they're not logging hours themselves. Then the provider and the admin can take over and log those hours for them. But as it's always the case, though, that the definitive total we use for working things out for like hour trades or rewards or tempo time credits, if you use those, and in the reporting area itself, we use the provider and the admin logged hour totals in most of the reporting areas. If we're using the volunteer total hours, it'll be clear that we're using those, and we'll say that we're using those. But on the main, it's the admin and provider total that matters in the system. So that's the one you want to focus on and make sure it's correct. That's why we have the two totals in the first place. Okay, so the first way of logging hours is bulk logging. So bulk logging, as the name suggests, means that you log a lot of hours for a lot of people all in one go. But you find this in the volunteer menu. It's called Log All Hours. And this is a great place to go to in the first instance if you want a little overview of your current situation. How many hours are outstanding for volunteers, whether there's lots of outstanding hours, just a few, what volunteers aren't having their hours logged, which providers aren't logging hours, those sorts of things. So we're going to do a little bit of a screen swap here while I show you how this works in real life. So you'll see something like this on your screen. It's available and saved in the volunteer management menu, Log All Hours down here. Very simple to use, but we'll go through the rules and what it's actually logging in a moment. But in practicality, it's very easy to use. Thanks to our friends at the Wildlife Trust, because they've helped us add some things here to make it more useful. If you ever have any ideas about any of the features or things you think might improve the system, please do let us know by support ticket. So here you get a list of all the volunteers that have hours outstanding. So this means that these volunteers have hours, have the admin and provider logged hours are less than the available for those sessions, if it's a sessional opportunity, or volunteers who have a flexible hour log, where the volunteer is logged more than the admin or the provider. So I'll go through that again. If it's a sessional opportunity, then volunteers will appear in this list if the hours they have logged against them are less than the available for the sessions they're on. And if they're on a flexible opportunity, they will appear here if the volunteer has logged more hours than the admin or the provider has logged. Okay. The reason it's like that is because for a sessional opportunity, obviously, we know exactly how many hours are supposed to be logged and when they're supposed to be logged for the session, because we have the date of the session and the hours for that session. For a flexible opportunity, we don't know those details, and all we know is what the volunteer has logged. Okay, so that's when they will appear in this screen. You get some bits of information here about how many they've logged, how many the provider or the admin has logged, and what is left to log. So here, for instance, we've got Akeem, the volunteer and the provider logged no hours. The session has 4 hours available, so there's 4 hours left to log. And the same for the next volunteer here. No hours have been logged, 1 available on the session to log, so the hours to log is 1. This box here has some information about the rules, which you should definitely read when you get to this page. And it explains when and how it will log these hours under which circumstances. On this page also, you've got a filter at the top to filter by provider. We've only got 1 provider here. But if you wanted to check out a single provider, you can select them from the drop-down, click Update, and it will only show you volunteers on sessions with that provider itself. Okay. The second part of bulk logging is the feedback, because each volunteer requires feedback before you can log the hours for them. So as well as bulk logging the hours, you'll also bulk log some feedback for that volunteer. So you enter whatever the feedback is, before you hit the green button to log the hours and log the feedback. It's important to note that this feedback is the same for everybody. So every volunteer on this list that you check the box for will receive this feedback and have their hours logged. Okay, so if we hit that green button now, screen refresh, and you can see that Akeem has disappeared from this screen now because they've had all their hours logged. And we've only got Esme left because she's still got 1 hour left to log. So it's pretty easy to use, but it's quite complicated to understand how and why it's logging hours. So we'll go over that a little bit in a second. A quick summary, it's a great page to find out how many hours are left outstanding. You can filter on provider. It will show you both sessional and flexible opportunities and volunteers on those opportunities that need their hours to log in. And the same feedback is logged for all volunteers. So using this system, you can't give individual feedback to the volunteer. They all get the same feedback. I can see some people have got their hands up and have questions, and say we'll pause at the end of this section to address some of those questions. So these are the rules it uses to decide which hours it's going to log when bulk logging. So by default on that list, if a provider or an admin has already logged some hours for that person on that session, they won't appear in the list. There's a checkbox on the top right of that page, you might notice it, and you can flip that on and off. The reason we do that is so that if a volunteer, say a session has 10 hours maximum available, but the volunteer only turned up for 5 and you've logged 5, you don't want then to overwrite that when you use the bulk hour login and put 10 instead of 5. Okay? So by default, it will exclude those sessions and those volunteers which have had some hours logged by an admin already. But you can choose to override that if you want. There's a little checkbox in the top right and a little tooltip to explain those things if you forget later on. For a sessional opportunity, it always logs the maximum number of hours that are available for that session. So if they're selected on that list of volunteers and you choose to bulk log the hours for those volunteers on that session, it will always log the maximum available for that session for that volunteer. So again, you can't individually adjust the hours for each volunteer or for each session or for each opportunity. This is a bulk logging operation. It does the same thing for everybody. So if there's 10 hours available on the session, that's what the person gets logged. For a flexible opportunity, remember that they only appear on that list if the volunteer has logged more hours than the admin. If the admin has logged more hours than the volunteer, it ignores them. If the volunteer has logged more hours, then the log history for that flexible op for that volunteer is copied to the admin hours. So again, it equalizes the hours that have been logged by the volunteer. It does the same thing as the volunteer has done. Because for a flexible opportunity, we don't have a maximum number of hours or an hours per session or anything like that. So it merely matches what the volunteer has logged. It's great in those situations where, for flexible opportunities where you don't know what the volunteer has done, you don't know what the provider's told the volunteer to do, but you know that the volunteer is logging hours. So you basically copy that into the admin logged hours total. And finally, the last column on that screen will show you how many hours that the system will log for each volunteer. So you can check and make sure that it sounds reasonable. Okay, that's a lot of information. It is quite complicated the way it logs hours. So we'll pause there. Let's see who's got their hands up. Anyone got their hands up there for a question? So I'll have to go up briefly.
Yep, my hands are still up and I've got a quick question.
Okay.
Yeah. I think the feature is a really good feature, but when we were using it, one of the things that we found was that if you bulk log the hours, it will bulk log hours for volunteers who may not have actually attended.
Absolutely.
So that's something to bear in mind and something to keep an eye on. So I just want to quickly flag that.
Yes, you can. So if the volunteers left the session, obviously it won't log the hours. And if they're marked as a no-show, it won't log the hours. But if none of that information is available, it will assume the volunteer has been on the session. Absolutely. So the bulk operation is really when you have a you're pretty confident that the volunteers are turning up and doing the sessions and doing the hours they're meant to be doing. There's a question here from Shelley in the chat about how the screen's slightly different for providers. Yes, for providers, you won't get the drop down to separate out providers, but the rest of the screen should look fairly similar. So the only thing that should be missing is drop down.
Sorry, Rolf, it doesn't. When I'm looking at my screen, I didn't even have the same tabs. I couldn't even get to the screen that you got to with bulk hour login.
Okay, and you're logged in as a provider?
Yes.
Okay, we'll address that at the end. If you can hang around at the end, you should see the same screen. We'll have to take a look, see what's up. But yeah, it's a fairly similar screen, but obviously just the volunteers are associated with you.
Yeah, sorry, it's just as you were looking at yours, it looked like the super admin screen because you've got the messages and all the different training tabs across the top. I just want to know which tab I need to click on the provider screen, that's all.
Okay, yeah, we'll take a look at the end. If you can hang around.
Okay,
anything else in here? We've got no, everyone's just trying to help Shelley out. Okay, any other questions about that?
Just back to basics, I had one bulk person on a flexible opportunity who had logged her hours. And that's fine, I've just approved it following your instructions and sent a message to her. I didn't quite understand where I need to log other people, where else do I need to log things, or is that sufficient? I have a lot of volunteers who are not logging any hours. Do I need to go in and create hours for them to encourage?
We'll go over that in a separate section. So if the volunteers are on flexible ops and haven't logged any hours yet, nothing will appear on that bulk log screen because they haven't logged any hours yet and they're on flexible ops. But we'll go in the next section or the one after talks about how to log hours on a flexible op.
Thank you.
And Gemma, and that'll be the last question for now, and we'll have to move on.
I actually think Claire just now kind of what I was going to raise, that I've looked on mine and I can only see one volunteer there, but I know I have probably 10 to 15 volunteers. Is it just that when I listed that ad, I listed it as flexible so it doesn't automatically
so
do that? Is that why?
Yeah, the same. Presumably, if it's flexible ops and they haven't logged any hours, then officially there's no outstanding hours to log.
Okay, and they're not concerned about logging the hours themselves, so they haven't done anything there.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay. All right. So I know there'll be lots of questions about bulk hours. It is a bit complicated the first time round. So I will hang around at the end and we can go through some more of those situations and stuff for you. So the next way of logging hours is a slightly smaller version of the bulk hour login, which is just for an opportunity. So if you look at the opportunity management screen and you're in the sessions area, you're looking for the blue button, which is bulk feedback and hour login. So this will do something very similar to the bulk logging that we've just seen, but only for that single opportunity. So all the same rules apply. If it's a sessional opportunity and you hit that button, you can leave some feedback and it will log all the maximum hours available for all the sessions for those volunteers. Regardless of what the volunteer has logged, it will log the maximum hours available for that session for each and every volunteer on all the sessions on that opportunity in one go. If it's a flexible opportunity, it will match any hours that the volunteer has logged if they're greater than what the admin or provider has logged. Exactly the same thing, but only within a single opportunity. It will sessional opportunity, it will log the maximum number of hours for each session for each volunteer. For a flexible opportunity, it will match the hour log of the volunteer if that is greater than the provider or admin logged hours. Okay. There is an extra option on this screen. If I, again, swap my screen over, sorry about the swapping and changing. It's the only way to do it, unfortunately. Okay, so we're back on the actual application here. Let me just get the screen up so I can see it. So if we go to an opportunity here, we're in the log hours section. We've got this blue button here, bulk feedback and hour login. Okay, you get a little brief notification about the number of hours you'll be matching. If you remember Esme from the previous screen, we had this volunteer Esme, and there was 1 hour left that hadn't been logged for that session. You can see that here again, tells you how many hours. Similar to the bulk login screen, you've got the feedback box to leave the feedback for the volunteer. But here you have two options. You can log just the feedback. That basically puts that feedback onto all volunteers. Or you can log the feedback and all the hours. The reason we have these two options will become apparent in the next section. But I don't know if you've noticed, but if you've got feedback on, then you have to leave feedback before you can log hours for a volunteer. Okay, so you have to give the thumbs up, thumbs down, and give the feedback, and then you can get to the next screen where you can log hours for individuals. So if that is too time consuming, or there's very many volunteers on an opportunity, you can use this bulk feedback and hour login option to enter the feedback for everybody and just log the feedback. And then you can go on to log hours individually without having to leave feedback individually, which will go on in the next section. Or you can go the full hog, leave the same feedback for everyone, and log all the maximum hours. Okay, so that's where you'll see that on the screen. It's in the log hours section when you're looking at an opportunity, and the blue button there you're looking for. Swap over again. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about why you would use the bulk login and which sort of situations, because those two situations where you're doing it for just an opportunity or for the whole application, the results are fairly similar and the rules are pretty similar. So it's very quick and it's very easy, and it prevents any sort of overload with having to get too much information, having to gather all this information about what every volunteer has done on every session, how many hours they did, were they there for the full session, all that sort of stuff. So if you need it needs to be quick and easy and accurate enough, then it's a good option. It works really well where your volunteers are very engaged and are mostly self-serving. They're joining opportunities. They're letting you know when they can't go to another opportunity, another session, and they're removing themselves from their session. If your offering is mostly sessional based, it also works very well. If you have a lot of volunteers or providers that you're not necessarily very familiar with, so you don't know that information, you don't know the volunteer, you don't know if they've been turning up, those sorts of things, and there's no real way of you finding that information out. Or if you don't really mind if the accuracy isn't quite right, if the volunteer is doing a few more or a few less hours in a session, it doesn't really matter. And again, if your rewards are not really tied into the number of hours logged, if you're not using tempo time credits, for instance, those sorts of things, it doesn't matter so much to you if it's slightly out. So they're the situations where bulk login hours works very well. If the reverse is true, if you have a lot of flexible opportunities and volunteers are not logging hours, then it reduces the usefulness of that page. As we've already noted with Claire and Gemma, if you've got flexible opportunities and the volunteers aren't logging hours, they won't even appear on the bulk log page because there's nothing to log. Okay, so these are the situations where it's really useful. The next part is where we can log individual hours. So this is where, sorry, it's the wrong screen, where you can log the actual hours that a volunteer has done for a particular session. So it's much more granular, it's much more precise, but obviously it takes longer. So for sessional opportunities, you'll probably be familiar with this, you've probably seen it already. If you choose to log individual sessions instead of logging bulk sessions, you'll get a screen which shows you each individual session and the number of hours available. So again, let's swap over so we can see what this looks like in real life. Okay, so we're back to Esme again here. So we're going to leave some feedback for Esme. Okay, and then we get the option to log individual sessions. So if we hit that button there, we can see she's only on one session. It indicates here how many hours are available and indicates how many have been logged. We've logged 0. As we've logged 0, we've logged 0, and there's 1 hour available. So this button over here defaults to 1 because that's the maximum hours available. And then we can hit the log, and it'll log those hours for Esme. Just refresh this page and show you what it looks like afterwards. So the screen updates here, and it tells us now that we've we've logged 1 hours. We've logged 1 hour against the 1 hour that was available, and they've been checked in. So they've been automatically noted that they've turned up for the session. Normally, if you log the hours for them, then they've turned up to the session. And you notice over here now the button's changed to update. So if you decide at a later date, if this was 2 hours that were available, and you decided that they didn't log 2, they only logged 1, then you could update those hour totals at any time. After the fact, you can update those hours at any time you like. So that's how it looks on the actual system. So that's the way to log individual hours for an individual volunteer on individual sessions. And obviously, you can appreciate that takes a lot longer because you have much more precision. Okay, so I'm going to pause there. If you've got any more questions about logging individual hours? It's a lot less complicated, and there's not any rules around it. But yeah, it obviously takes a lot longer to do. And so sometimes you might not know the information anyway. Claire?
For you, Esme turned up. She was there. How do I'm so sorry I missed it. How do I get my volunteers to turn up on that list in order to log them individually?
Okay, so this is for a sessional opportunity.
Okay, I'll spot out. I'm talking flexible.
Okay, yeah, so this is for a flexible opportunity where we already know the sessions and when they should have been and how long they should have been there for.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? Gemma?
So even though I originally listed my adverts as a flexible opportunity, they're actually not. Like the same people do the same hours week in, week out.
Okay.
Can I go back and edit that so it is sessional? Because they're usually like 3 hours each time they come in.
You can change a flexible up to a sessional opportunity, but then you'll have to add the sessions. Okay, so you can only convert. There's an option here. Find this. You've got an option here for convert and copy, so you can convert an opportunity from one type to another. But it can only do it in certain situations, depending on how many hours have been logged, how many volunteers have joined, those sorts of things. So it might be possible to flip your flexible op into a sessional op, but you will have to then add the sessions. So the fact that they're turning up every week at the same time isn't necessarily the same as it being a sessional op, because someone else might be turning up at a different time every week, which makes it still flexible. So a sessional opportunity is where you have specific sessions running every week or every day at a certain time for a certain length of time. And you know ahead of time what they are, and you add those sessions, and people join those sessions. They don't have a choice when they turn up. They have to turn up for those sessions. Okay, so if you have someone that is regularly volunteering, but at a time of their choosing, that's a flexible opportunity.
Okay, I'll leave it as is then.
Okay. So the next type of opportunity where you log in for individual volunteers are the flexible opportunities we've just spoken about. So instead of having an individual session that you log in hours against, there's just a random log of hours that are logged for that person. So this volunteer is on a flexible op. They've logged no hours. We've logged no hours. So we know they turned up on the 1st of December and were there for 2 hours. So we log 2 hours for them, and then the history appears here. Okay. We also know they turned up for 4 hours on the 2nd of December. It'll keep adding to the history. Okay. So there's no set time you have to log, and there's no set date you have to log. That's what makes it flexible. And you build up a history of their hours. If the volunteer had logged hours, if we go to Akeem here, and we're going to impersonate them, I'll log some hours for them. I'm just going to pop over to the volunteer, Is that updated the screen yet? Can you see that now? Yeah, good. Swap the screen. So we're going to go into this volunteer. We've got the opportunity here, and we're going to log some hours for them. So again, it's asking me for the feedback. Doesn't matter what you put in. Go to the log hours screen. They get something very similar. So they can see what you've logged here. So this is the provider or the admin have logged. So those are the 4 and 2 hours we've logged. And the provider says, well, I also turned up today for 3 hours. And if we go back to the admin screen now, sorry again for the flipping about. I'm going to refresh this page. Now, when we look at the login history, we've got the 2 logs that the providers put in and the log that the volunteers put in for 3 hours on Wednesday, the 3rd of December. So again, we're still keeping a tally, a 2 tally, just so we can check and audit the hours afterwards. But right now, the provider and the admin have logged more hours than the volunteer has. But they still wouldn't appear on the bulk login screen. But if I was to log extra hours on top, just entered another log. You'll see this on the screen in a second. Okay, so I've just put in another 10 hours for the volunteer. So the volunteer's now logged 13 hours and we've only logged 6. Okay, we've done it individually here. If I go to the log all hours page now, so you can see here now that Akeem has logged 13 hours, but we've only logged 6 on a flexible op. So now I could log those hours. I could match what Akeem was logged using this button, using the bulk hours button. Okay, so that's how the interplay works between flexible hours and the bulk hours login. And we can see, so anytime you want to log for flexible hours, you can log at any time. It's important to remember to use the date the hours were for. So don't log the hours against today's date. Log those hours against when the volunteer actually did those hours. It's also beneficial if you don't roll all the hours up together, if you can. So depending on your requirements for reporting and precision, you could put all the hours for 1 week in one log event, or you could put all the hours for 1 month in one log event. It's important to understand that if you log the hours against a month, then when you go to the reporting page and you're looking for the hours logged, between 2 periods, the only date you've got there is that one date for the 1 month. Okay, so if you don't log hours, if you roll up the hours into a single log event, you can't unroll them when you're looking at the reporting. So you can't tell, say you only wanted to know the number of hours that were logged in the first week of December. If I'd logged all the hours for December in one go, then I wouldn't be able to tell that afterwards. Okay? So log the hours individually for when the hours were earned, not today's date, not when you logged the hours, when the hours were actually earned. Okay? Any questions about that, the flexible hour log? Hi, Claire?
Is there a push-pull notification to volunteers about when you're doing their hours?
No. We don't send out automatic emails when volunteers or when admins log hours. There is an email available for when providers log hours. It's an optional one. A lot of people switch it off because it does generate quite a few emails. So no, we don't, as far as I understand, as far as I remember rather, we don't email when providers add to the flexible log here.
Okay,
it's an interesting idea though, but I don't know if it doesn't really matter because we use the provider and admin log hours as the definitive total. Even if the volunteer doesn't log any hours on this side of the equation, they will still see these hours in their system on their dashboard. The volunteer will. So there isn't much consequence to the volunteer of not logging hours if you're already logging them. It's only consequential if you need them to log them and they're not doing it.
Well,
If that makes sense.
I was thinking of that because I have a lot of volunteers who are currently reluctant to become involved in TeamKinetic. So I was thinking if there was a push notification that it may pique their curiosity to become involved.
Yeah, I'll write it down. I don't see why we couldn't add it as one of those optional emails. I think for most people it would probably be off. But I'll look to see. I'm just writing it down now. I'll look to see if we can maybe add that as an option.
They may not have signed up to GDPR for us to be allowed to do that. I don't know if that would be an issue.
Well, those are counted as transactional emails. So they're not unsolicited.
Okay.
So in terms of opting out for email content and things like that, they don't necessarily have to opt in. That doesn't mean they won't still be annoyed if they're getting emails like that, but they don't have to opt in for those emails legally.
Okay.
Because they're part of the transactional process of volunteering and being on the site.
Great. Yeah. Thank you.
Mark?
Yeah, it's just an understanding. We have a situation where our providers are not aware of our volunteers' activities because they're acting out independently in the field. They're off doing stuff at a point and then they come back and tell us later, which is fine when they're engaged. But we've got scenarios where we have small groups of people. So let's say we've got 4 people visiting somewhere, 3 of which are technophobes and 1 is a technophile. So the one technophile will log the cumulative hours for those 4 people's activity. And so we're obviously concerned that 3 of those people could end up being regarded as inactive. So we're obviously keen to understand how we can avoid losing what are technically active people, but they're not logging the hours. And whilst we'll do everything we can to persuade them, there's every chance that they will remain scared of the technology and just be sitting in the background. So
Yep.
Whether there's an ability at some point to mark them as a group, I don't know. But yeah, that's our sort of thought at the moment.
That's too big a thing to answer now, but you can hang around at the end, Mark, and we'll talk about it then. Yeah, there would be a danger that they would become inactive. Anyone else? So I can't see all the hands that are up in one go, sorry. If there's anyone else with their hand up. No. Okay, so just a bit of the whys and whens for logging individually. So it's much more precise and accurate. You can adjust for individual situations where someone maybe if had to leave early for a session, or even if they stayed later. As an admin or provider, you can log more hours than the maximum available in a session. And it gives you the most accurate reporting. So you can always, in a year's time, you can go back and you can find out exactly how many hours were logged in very certain periods with a high degree of accuracy. Whereas if you're bulk logging, you don't know for sure if the volunteer turned up for those sessions or did the full time. If you've got lots and lots of flexible opportunities and you need to keep an eye on what people are doing, then individual logging works much better than bulk logging. As we've discussed, if your volunteers aren't very digitally engaged and aren't logging their own hours, then sometimes bulk logging won't work either. And if you're pretty familiar with your volunteers, some of our organizations, the providers and the volunteers are well known to them. In other situations, like a brokerage sort of situation where you have a volunteer center, they may know nothing much at all about their providers and what goes on the ground. In which case, individual logging is probably not worth the time. But they can still encourage the providers to log individually, the providers that do know the volunteers. The last thing I want to touch on is the deleted volunteers. So volunteers get deleted for a number of reasons. As Mark touched on there, if they become inactive, there's a bunch of settings to decide when those volunteers get removed. They could be removed by themselves. They just decide they don't want to participate anymore and they want to get rid of their data. They can choose to remove themselves, or an admin removes them for whatever reason. Once they're deleted, regardless of the settings you've put, incidentally, there's another masterclass around safeguarding, which goes through all the retained data options, which you can hunt out in the help menu again. And that explains all the retained data options. That's just for admins. Any providers on this call, you don't get to decide those things, unfortunately. It's only the admins. But at the very minimum, when volunteers are deleted, we store an anonymous copy of their hours. So regardless of what settings you have for data retention, whenever a volunteer is deleted, we always save the hours anonymously. Okay, so what happens to those hours? As I say, they're always saved regardless of what you do. They are stored separately. They can't view those hours anymore. So if you go to the opportunity they used to be on, you won't see those volunteers and you won't see those hours. They're not connected to the opportunities anymore because the volunteers don't exist anymore. They are saved with the original login date. So if you look at the reporting page in the headline stats and you've selected a date range, the deleted hours will be accurate. You can see them in the reporting page in brackets. So they only appear in the headline stats, which is at the top of the reporting page. They're included in the total hours. And then in brackets, you've got the separate area, the separate figure, which is just the deleted hours. So if I share this tab, you can see here for the all-time totals, I've got 69 logged hours, and in brackets, I've got 54. This is a test system, so people get deleted a lot. And if I hit the question mark, it gives me a little clue here. It tells me that the anonymized hours from deleted volunteers are in brackets. Okay, so that's the only place you'll see the deleted hours are in the headline stats. They don't appear in the other sections because they're not attached to a volunteer anymore, and they're not attached to an opportunity anymore. So they can't be merged into these other sections. They will appear here in the headline stats, and they will adjust depending on the dates you select, because we do know when they were logged. We just don't know who logged them anymore. Yeah, so just remember that they don't appear anywhere else. So the only place you'll see them is in those brackets. Okay, any questions about deleted hours? Oh, yep, there you go.
Sorry, I work in a college, so
Yes.
I try to start the opportunity of volunteering for students, but I try to make it like internal. When I got the students logged with the council, there's some that I have to unlink because there are not students with that anymore. The thing is, there's some students that I cannot unlink them. I tried to delete them, I can't delete them, and I don't understand why, or how will I be able to delete them? Because they cannot get into the data anymore.
Okay.
They're not allowed.
We'll put that to the end of the thing, because it's not technically about the hours. So we'll speak about that at the end.
Thank you.
If you hang around at the end. Habs?
Yeah, Rob, just a quick one. I don't know whether you covered this because I came into the meeting a bit later.
Okay.
But on the homepage, you've got a task icon on the left-hand side, as well as the where's it gone? Activity. On there, you got volunteer hours to log, and on the task, hours to log. So have you covered that, and what the difference is between the two?
No, but let's have a quick look at that.
Thank you.
If I share this tab instead. Okay, so Habs is talking about this on the dashboard here, which will look slightly different for providers and admins, but the concepts are the same. So you've got a list of volunteers here which have logged hours, which have not been matched. So it gives you a quick guide. There's none on the beta site, unfortunately. And also in activity, it shows you when volunteers have logged hours. So this is a great place to catch up with the activity, the recent activity. This is in the last 30 days, and just keep it manageable. So this shows you all the volunteers that have logged hours in the last 30 days. If it's a flexible opportunity, so here's Akeem again. If it's a flexible opportunity, you have this green button to match logged hours, which does the same thing as the bulk login for opportunities and the bulk login for the whole application. It will take the flexible login history that the volunteer has done and copy it to the provider and the admin, if it's more So if the volunteers log more hours on a flexible op, it will match those hours and copy them over to the provider and the admin log. If it's a sessional opportunity, you just hit the manage and it helps you, and you go to the opportunity screen page where you can log individual hours for those people. Takes you straight to this screen here. Okay, so it's just another way of getting some information about who's logged hours. But it doesn't actually do anything until you click any of these buttons. It won't automatically log these hours just because they're in this column. It's just some information for you. That makes sense, Abs?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Shelley?
Sorry, I wasn't sure if you'd responded to this. I've just got a couple of questions. Do volunteers get notified if you mark them as a no-show, and do volunteers get notified if you delete them?
No, in both cases. For the deletion, not if you delete them. If obviously if a volunteer deletes themselves, they know they delete themselves. If a volunteer is going to be removed, going to be deleted due to inactivity, they get an email 7 days before, prompting them to log on if they want to preserve their account, or just ignore it and they will get removed after 7 days. If you, as an admin, delete a volunteer, they don't get a notified no.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, and a no-show. Do they get notified? No, they don't get notified if you mark them as a no-show.
No.
Okay, thank you.
If you remove them from a session that's in the future, they do get a notification. But not from a session in the past.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so if anyone's got questions surrounding this, about other things are a bit more complicated, some we've already heard from already. If you hang around, oh, hang on, Ali's got a hand up. Hi, Ali.
Hi. So I went to my bulk log all hours, what you first started talking about.
Yes.
And I had 7,000 hours not logged.
Okay.
So I then logged them all, see what would happen. But nothing changed on my reporting page. The number stayed the same of the total hours logged.
Okay, we'll have a look at that afterwards then, Ali.
Okay.
Anyone else with any questions? Okay, so just a quick summary. It's a lot of information, especially around the bulk logging. It is quite complicated. There are some rules to learn. So I'd encourage you to take a look at the screen, digest the text that's on the screen, and also check out the workbook for some more information. It's got screenshots in there as well and stuff. So you can pick it up at your own pace rather than me talking really rapidly at you for an hour. So all that information is available in that workbook. Gemma, it's not in a FAQ format, but it's there for you to consume. If you're prioritizing speed and convenience over accuracy, then use the bulk login hours. If you need the accuracy and you need the precision, then you have to log the hours individually. But they both work pretty effectively. And as long as your volunteers are engaged and are logging hours on flexible opportunities, the bulk login hours and the bulk log for the opportunity can be very effective and still pretty accurate. All right, well, thanks everyone for coming. Do check out the help menu. All this information's there. This video will be there later on, but all the videos of the other masterclasses, the workbooks, the decks and all that sort of stuff is available there. So you can catch up on all the other stuff. Thanks for coming and have a great day.